Welcome to the first episode of the Battle Brothers Iceberg. We will be going through the Iceberg that was presented to Reddit by Reddit user Eatcunts Daily. Daily? I wonder how many that is.
Lots of cunts.
We start our first entry with Daggering Armor. Now, many players agree that an optimal method of farming armor is to use the puncture action of a dagger so as to avoid damaging the armor worn by the enemy. And in so doing, increase the chances of gaining said armor as loot. Not all players agree with this method, since most armor worn by the enemy tend to be subpar to what the player actually wants. The dagger method usually comes in handy when the player finds an enemy with a decent amount of armor. Example, this is when the enemy is wearing a legendary piece of armor. It's never known when certain enemies have armor like this, or armor that a player would want. So it's always good to keep a knife or dagger in the brother's inventory. An alternative method is to use flails. Now the flail, as any player would know, tends to hit the head more often than the body. Now, the flail doesn't always hit the head though, so I guess you aren't going to get all the armor pieces that you want, but there's a good reason why most players opt to do this instead of daggering their enemies down. And this is because the flail, well, simply is faster taking down enemies. Now, an interesting thing that I found out, and this is not necessarily about the game, but it is about the dagger. Specific daggers were used in medieval times, especially during the 13th and 15th century, for example, in duels. Now, I recently made a video about The Last Duel, made by Disney, actually 20th Century Studios. Anyway, great movie, great last fight scene, really gets grimy, dirty, muddy, bloody, all the E's. But the cool thing about that is that there was a scene where Adam Driver takes out a knife or a dagger. The type of dagger that is called a rondel dagger. Now the rondel dagger, the reason why it's called a rondel dagger, by recent historians, not at the time, is because of the round or octagonal shape that's a guard will have that's stuck to the hilt on both sides of the hilt, the top part. Well, I guess the guard, and then the dagger, and then the hilt, and the pommel, I guess. Anyway, the thing is round, so recent historians have decided to call it the rondel dagger. We don't really know what it was called back then, I guess. Or maybe I just simply don't know. However, we do know that it was called the miséricorde. Now, miséricorde, that's French for mercy. I guess we get misery from the word misery? Cord? I don't know. I need to look that up. Anyway, point is, it means mercy. And the reason why it means mercy is because after a duel, after you get bashed up by their sword or mace or whatever, I mean, you're going to be hurting. You're going to have broken bones. Maybe you have lost an eye at that point. You know, a nose, a hand. Who knows? You're pretty much dunzos. The blade, if it could call it a blade, it's more like a big ice pick. Like a big ice pick. Basically, take the pointy end and stab him where it hurts. Where it hurts, meaning in between armor plates, and because of its pointed edge, it's capable of finding those small grooves in the chainmail and puncture right through it, and basically delivering that fatal blow that will take the opponent out for good, and very quickly, that is. And therefore, the knife was often called mercy. Now the next entry is brain damage is good. Now, I think many of us might be like, hold on a second, I thought brain damage is like a permanent injury, and it definitely does not sound good in real life. However, given game mechanics, sometimes permanent injuries, something that might look like a major setback, could work for your benefit. First of all, going over the stats, the stat changes that this permanent injury would give your brother, you get negative 25% XP gain, pretty bad, and negative 25% initiative. Not all that bad depending on what kind of brother you're building or have built. But the real caveat to this injury is the 15% boost for resolve. Now, on top of the 15% boost for resolve, which might work very well for probably all your brothers, it has a very specific and niche usage among players who have the cultist origin. Now, players who have the cultist origin need to find brothers who are susceptible to brainwashing and therefore start worshipping Davkul. The problem with this origin is that while you're trying to gain these enormous buffs that can be granted through having your brothers devote themselves to this god, there are some backgrounds that simply cannot be persuaded to worship, such as hunters, hedge knights, mercenaries, sellswords, swordmasters. These guys do not have it. They just simply won't drink the Kool-Aid. They won't do it. Unless they're dumb. So I guess if you don't want to do the brain damage or anything like that, you're going fishing for a dumb hedge knight. But I mean, good luck with that, because I've only come across like a handful of brothers with the dumb trait. What they would do is they would take the hedge knight that they just hired and have him repeatedly go down until he gets that permanent injury. This is very time consuming because permanent injuries are completely random. It doesn't matter if the brother gets hit in the head and dies. The permanent injury is purely random. So it might take a lot of tries, or you might get it on the first try. It doesn't matter. The point is, once you get brain injury, then that brother can now become a cultist. He will believe, I guess. He would lose that part of his brain that was telling him, hey man, joining a death cult in a post-apocalyptic medieval world, nah, I don't think that's the best idea. That part of the brain that's telling him that, well, it got smashed in by a berserker chain. So I thought this was a really weird way of approaching things. However, no matter how time consuming it is, with the retinue companions, if you hire a surgeon, the surgeon will make sure to keep that brother alive. So I guess you're increasing your chances of getting brain injury faster because your brother isn't going to die. I don't know, it's just a way of getting brain injury. And it is kind of a reason why brain injury is good, or brain damage is good. Maybe try it sometime. Get a motorcycle license. Headless Fallen Heroes. Now you might be wondering, hold on a second. Fallen Heroes, aren't those the undead? The Wedegangers? I thought they die. Like die. Like stay dead. And don't get back up once you lop their heads off. Well, you'd be wrong if you're going up against the Fallen Heroes. These guys keep going, even without a head. I mean, you kind of wonder how they're moving, or I guess how they're actually figuring out where you are. Also, they can still bite you. Speaking of phantom pains when you lose an arm or a leg, them zombies got phantom bites. This will work even with necromancers when they resurrect the undead. They would actively resurrect the fallen heroes above any other Wetaganger. Next up, we've got snake leg injury. I mean, since we were talking about the headless fallen heroes, may as well talk about another phantom injury. So these serpents, why do they get the leg injury? If you've played enough Battle Brothers, and if you've come across these bastards enough times, you would have noticed that every now and again, they will get a leg injury. So you wonder, do they have legs? They don't. They don't have legs. But they still get the injury. That's probably because they have a specific code that basically omits any arms, legs, limb injury from them, except for the cut leg muscles. The cut leg muscles injuries, for some reason, is not listed within those prohibited within those injuries that a snake shouldn't be able to get. Also, while researching this, I came across something that said a plural form of snakes is called a knot of snakes or a knot of serpents, and I'm definitely using that from now. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can't really fact check. I just came across it and I thought it was great, so I'm gonna start using it. Next up, we've got Steel Brow OP. So Steel Brow is a perk that you can give one of your brothers. It basically allows them to get hit in the head and not take as much damage as they would have, or they don't get stunned or dazed, respectively. Well, if it is stunned, then they'll get dazed. If it is dazed, then it doesn't affect them. It's a good trait or perk to give your brother, especially if you're playing solo, like a lone wolf or something like that. It's a pretty good perk. I would recommend it. I usually give it to most of my frontline brothers, and like I said, if I'm playing a lone wolf campaign, then I'm definitely giving it to him. It also goes really well against orcs and the orc young when they all charge you. None of those stuns work on you, so you don't really lose a turn. So all in all, I really like this perk, but some people do have their differences about it. Some people would like to give the brother gifted because it usually comes in that perk tier. They're both on the same perk tier. So a lot of people debate on whether to give their brothers Steel Brow or not. I'll just go ahead and read the description. Hits to the head no longer cause critical damage to this character, which also lowers the risk of sustaining debilitating head injuries. Steel Brow negates the additional damage provided by Brute or Chop. So basically, if the enemy has Brute and hits your head, it should do plus 15 damage, I think, but it doesn't. One argument for Steel Brow is in the late game, especially when you're going up against Reavers, Berserkers, and just things that can hit you in the head with a two-handed weapon. Even if you're fully clad, even with a brother that's fully clad, there's a good chance he might get taken out. Now, Reddit user Responsibility IC927 was gracious enough to post his picture of his champion, Arnold the Champion, close to death after being hit by a two-handed flail. So the two-handed flail, the flails got buffed, and therefore, after that, Steel Brow seemed like a must-have. Otherwise, your brothers would start dying like flies left and right. Now, in the Steam community, Turtle225 has posted a kind of like a study. He's actually doing a study for Nimble builds. Had several, I think 4 different kinds of armor sets. Lots of head armor, fewer body armor, even amount of head and body armor, lots of body armor, very little head armor, and then finally both lots of head armor and lots of body armor. For the one that has very little head armor and a lot of body armor, the combination was the Necromancer hat and the Noble Mail. Basically 40 durability and 160 durability respectively. He gave Steel Brow for that character, for that brother. In total, like, for his study, the survivability, the brother that had the most survivability was the one who was wearing the assassin mask and the assassin robes, which was 140 and then 120 durability respectively. But the one build that surpassed survivability was the Necromancer hat plus Noble Mail with Steel Brow. Now, of course, his study, Turtle has admitted that his study isn't complete. It's not the best. I think it's pretty good. But you have to understand that these are numbers, and they don't really take into account the long gameplay and all the things that can happen. And therefore, this isn't a clear way of saying Steel Brow is the perk that you need to have the most survivability. That's not necessarily what this is saying. It's just saying that with Steel Brow, this particular nimble build was able to survive more than the most optimal build that Turtle could come up with. Our next entry is Inconsistent Backstories. This one seems straightforward enough, but correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this one is talking about the fact that you can't rely on the flavor text that accompanies recruits on the recruitment screen. For example, a recruit could have an amazing backstory that entices you to hire him and expect him to be a great addition to your company. But upon checking his stats and whatnot, you realize that his stats really don't do anything with the backstory that came with him. It goes to tell that the backstories are really just for flavor, and there is no significance or effect on the brother's starting stats or traits. I tried looking for mods that might bridge the two together, which seems like a thing that people might be able to do, but sadly I haven't been able to find anything. So hopefully that would be a thing, because that would be cool. I mean, you pick up this sword master who's killed like 20 orcs in one battle or something, and you expect him, right? You expect him to be great and not have 3 stars in ranged defense or whatever. Just saying. For our next one, we have Backstabber on Polearms. Now, this is actually really, really practical. It's kind of counterintuitive, because the 2 ranged melee weapon doesn't seem like it would connect with Backstabber. Backstabber is kind of like, you're right there, you're stabbing the opponent in the back when he's distracted. And actually Backstabber sounds more like you're gonna stab your own bros. But anyway, I feel like the naming on that needs a little bit of a rework. I'm not really sure, but regardless, that's just me. The perk actually grants a 10% melee skill bonus for every ally that's distracting that particular enemy you're trying to target. And this doesn't matter if you have a ranged melee weapon. So it works on polearms. They're always going to have someone in between them and their enemy. Therefore, they're almost always guaranteed that 10% hit bonus. Next one, Belly Dancer. Belly Dancer is a type of bro that you can recruit. You only need to pay 500 crowns, or if you want to risk it, you virtually pay nothing, but you have a 25% chance of being able to recruit him. So pay the 500 crowns. You need to be able to trigger the event, though. You're going to need to be in one of the southern states, and you're going to have to be allied with that particular southern state. He's excellent. He always starts with the dexterous trait. Like, absolutely, he always comes with that. So it's a +5 melee skill right off the bat. There's a similar event that happens in the southern states, called I think the sword swallower, the sword eater. Sorry. Anyway, if you have a barbarian or a wildman background in your company, then you can gain his sword after the wild man accidentally kills him when he tries to give him money. It happens. You gain a sword. It's good. A fencing sword at that. I love some of the comments that were left in the Reddit posts that I was reading. Basically, many people in the community would post their belly dancer, and basically it is a one-time character throughout a campaign. So they kind of go to the Reddit to ask other players to see what kind of build they should try with this particular belly dancer, or with the particular belly dancer that they have. And it's just some of the comments that were left were just cracking me up. So let me just read you 3 of them. Oh boy, he's beautiful. Pretty please strip him naked before posting so we can see the pure stats. He's a belly dancer. At least do it for the sake of roleplay, damn it. Why isn't he a dude? Oh, I'm sorry. Why is he a dude? Why is he a dude? Now I want to start with the Battle of Many Names. Now, if you've played the game before, you're most likely come across a particular piece of lore hidden within dialogue and texts and contracts and things like that. The Battle of Many Names was a massive, brutal battle that took place about 10 years before you start your campaign. Somewhere in the eastern side of the map, or the known world, basically the visible portion of the map. So according to the digital lore and art book, we know that the greenskins, as we know them, they're made up of 2 species, the orcs and the goblins. They don't really act as a unified force. They're kind of doing their own thing. They even do their own thing within their respective species. They basically have different factions. But their warlike nature also doesn't really help them, achieve that civilization status that the humans have. It's a little different with the goblins. The goblins kind of have like a sophisticated society that they have, but even then they still have that really, I don't know, conniving, scheming, warlike mentality that brings them down ultimately. So they will never, either of them will never reach human status in culture and in civilization. However, just because they're dumb brutes or pesky little spiteful creatures doesn't mean that men shouldn't be worried about them. As men expanded into the land, they had to basically kick these greenskins out, and that's what we start with the game. We basically start into a world where the greenskins have been shoved to the side by men. And they were pushed off into the east, basically the clouded portion of the map, and there they would have all sorts of infighting and all that, and so they wouldn't really mind what people do. Usually the orc young are sent out to raid caravans and small towns to prove themselves and bring back little trinkets and whatnot, and then they'll rank up and they'll become berserkers, they'll become warriors, maybe even a warlord, who knows. But they usually fight each other. That's what the orcs do. And then as for the goblins, they're always kind of doing this like power struggle within the political caste. They basically have 2 castes: the political castes and the labor caste. The political caste, they always try to bring each other down. So for example, within their council, by the way, they have a council, kind of like an oligarchy is how I'm imagining it, like early Rome, or like how it might have been in Greece, in the city-states and whatnot, because the goblins do have city-states rather than camps like the orcs and whatnot, or territories like the orcs. They just have this one massive city-state where they all live, and there's like several of these, and each city-state is its own faction. And they'll fight each other. They'll even use the orcs to go raid a different goblin city-state. A lot of the times when a goblin warband or something, I don't know, would come and attack human territory, it's usually a suicide mission. It's not really a raid. The reason why that's happening is because within the council, they would deem one of the political leaders within their council who they don't like, who they want to get rid of, to basically recruit a bunch of labor castes who are also under his command, and they send him on a suicide mission to get rid of him. The Battle of Many Names is supposed to be this apocalyptic event that happened 10 years before the game begins, or whenever you start a campaign. And it was basically a conglomerate of orcs and goblins and all sorts of greenskins, all attacking men at once. I'm guessing that the Battle of Many Names wasn't the first one that happened. It was just the recorded one and the one that's remembered. And I assume that similar things has happened before. Scholars, in-game scholars, believe that a full-scale invasion that could surpass the Battle of Many Names would never happen. In one of the endgame narrations, the player character refers to the greenskin crisis as something that was worse than the Battle of Many Names. Now, the narrator, or the player character, isn't always a reliable narrator, and therefore, you could argue that he's kind of embellishing his stories to make him look better. He is a mercenary captain after all. But that being said, basically the Battle of Many Names took place in one place. It was one big battle. Happened somewhere in the eastern front of the map. However, the Greenskin Crisis happens in multiple locations. It's not just one settlement that's being attacked. It's multiple settlements across the eastern front that's being attacked. So if you think about that, maybe, and that's what the narrator says. He says it was organized, it had strategy, and they were attacking everywhere all at once. Unlike the Battle of Many Names, which only happened in one location, they didn't really have much strategy. They were just throw as many green bodies against humies and hope they die, is probably what they were going for. So I need to mention that there is a possibility that the player character, or basically the captain of the mercenary band, might have been in the Battle of Many Names. When he comes across these travelers, he does say that before you get to read whatever the traveler talked about, it would start with like one thing stuck in his mind, and he couldn't stop thinking about it, and then you get to read whatever that one thing was. So I was thinking, maybe the captain, has some kind of trauma, or maybe he was a part of this Battle of Many Names. It was 10 years ago, so he was definitely alive at the time. You don't really know what age he is. I guess you could give him your own age. But imagine if he was somewhere in his late 30s, then he could totally be participating in that battle, and it was a very big battle. So he might have been in that battle, or he might have been somewhere close, so he saw it, or maybe heard about it, or maybe he saw people or know people that were in it, were killed by greenskins, and therefore was really invested in knowing about this battle, because it kind of would have been for him like something that decided his fate, right? So maybe it's that. Maybe he was a part of the battle, but in any case, he was affiliated somehow with the Battle of Many Names. Again, I don't think the game specifically wants to say that. The developers has a clear reason as to not include the main character, the captain, into the Battle of Many Names. Like, oh yeah, he was a part of it, or no, he wasn't, because it really messes with the roleplay aspect of the whole thing. And that's what's really cool about Battle Brothers, is that when you start a new campaign, you basically make your own story. And yeah, now that there are books, there is kind of like a lore, a set lore. I guess you could call it canon. But it's been what, 7, 8 years since the game has been out, and we're finally getting something that's linear. And even that isn't all that much. Like the books, they're cool, they're fun. I haven't read them, but from what I heard and what I've seen a little bit, they're really great. So I really want to look into them. But do they provide the all the information that people have been asking for, been waiting for? It basically is an extension of all the in-game dialogue and in-game information that we get, and it just makes more questions. As many as the answers, it just creates more questions. So, yeah, they're fun. I mean, it's a great thing that these books are coming out, and I'm loving it. And it's actually fleshing out the world in a very good way, because honestly, it would suck if the books just came out and were like, oh yeah, this is this and that and this, and A led to B and B led to C, and that's why this is how it is. And that's not really fun. I mean, sure, it's fun learning about it, but the thing is, players have been speculating about Battle Brothers lore pretty much since its conception. And basically, I think people just want to mull it over and try and figure it out for themselves. Back to what I was originally talking about. These travelers' accounts, some of them are like glimpses of the battle. And we know for a fact that there was a front, like a vanguard for the human side, and then there was a northern front, and there was a southern front. And the southern flank, I should call it, was a cavalry charge from the human side. We know this from one of the dialogues that happened with the travelers, but they charged through muddy, mucky terrain, and their charge was not as effective. And as they approached the enemy line, basically the guy who's telling the story says that his commander, who was forcing them to make this suicide charge, gets impaled, horse and all, by a orc polearm and dies on the spot. And that was pretty much it. The dude says that the northern flank fared better than the southern flank. But that's not saying much, because the southern flank was pretty much decimated by the end of the battle. Other accounts, so we don't know anything about the northern flank, for that matter. There's no one, we don't meet anyone from that side. But we do meet actually three, different individuals as random travelers. And they were all placed in the vanguard. One of them says he doesn't want to talk about it, so it doesn't really give us much information, like details, but it just goes to say like how brutal the battle was. He's just traumatized. He doesn't want to talk about it. He wants to put it in the past, right? The second guy was a footman who was charged to protect his lord. Now, when the berserkers came in and started flinging their chains around, basically one of those hit the storyteller's lord in the head, threw him off his horse, killed him instantly, sent the horse he was on into shock, making it collapse on top of the storyteller. He says that later he would say that he fought his way to surviving the battle, but in reality he basically got knocked to the ground, and he was underneath a horse, and the orcs didn't notice him, and he just stayed there until the end of the battle. So it goes to say again how chaotic everything was. The third person we talked to is actually a mercenary captain, or used to be. And during the Battle of Many Names, he led a company of about, I think, a dozen men. He says that the fight was so brutal that he lost almost half of his men. However, this is the only story that we hear about the Battle of Many Names that results in a sort of a good ending. I mean, not a good ending for the guys who died in his company, but good ending for him, because he says that after the battle, he basically got paid, and the amount of riches that he received after winning the battle was so immense that he was able to retire, and it basically was his magnum opus of being a mercenary captain. And that final story kind of, I don't know, it just encourages the player, it encourages the player character, the captain in game, I guess, to strive for the end game crisis, to get ready and to look forward to killing greenskins. I guess that's kind of my takeaway from it all. Now, I said earlier in the Greenskin Invasion, the Battle of Many Names entry, that the main focus of Battle Brothers is all about the roleplay aspect. And the next entry, Supernatural Captain, kind of sheds light on this, or touches on this, because the captain is basically said to be kind of like this invincible, kind of like almost like a force of nature in a way. He's destined to seek out these legendary locations with these world-ending enemies, and he valiantly leads his mercenary company to victory and to the spoils and to the riches, and to leave a name in history. Of course, as a player, I mean, that's the whole point of the game. You're playing the game, you're going places, you're looting stuff, you're killing things, you're collecting things, and you're creating the strongest, meanest, baddest mercenary company that this particular campaign has ever seen. But it kind of basically ties that player motive into the character motive. So in-lore motive, like the character itself, yourself, your player character, he has motive to be doing these things. He's almost led to these places because he's destined for greatness. And therefore the player can roleplay and say that, his captain is whatever. That's why he is going to these places. That's why he's seeking danger, but he's seeking greatness at the same time. Something that kind of goes along with this, and also it's really cool because it doesn't dive into it. It doesn't give you enough information for you to make anything of it, but it does give you that little taste of what kind of greatness this captain is destined for. And you see this whenever the undead or witches call him the False King. And that is our next entry, the False King. The False King. This one's really good. I've got a lot to say about this one. But let me just tell you, it's long, it's big, it's bigger than the Battle of Many Names. I did a lot of speculation for this one, so hopefully it's cool. But I thought it was cool. I still think it's cool. I still am not finished with all my theories, but it's really all theories at this point. No definite anything. But man, is this cool. So, let's get into it. Alright, so the False King. Like I said, it ties back into the Supernatural Captain entry. Now, the protagonist, or the captain, we'll just go with the captain. The captain is often referred to as the False King. Now, since the sandbox, type of gameplay that this game offers, not a lot of detail is fed to us. However, there are some interesting points that the game makes, especially throughout the undead crisis. This False King thing keeps popping up, whether it is simply the undead calling the captain False King, or something about the captain being this past emperor, or more so a usurper. These kind of visions keep reoccurring, and therefore it kind of lets us know that the captain has this past life, probably. Now, Reddit user by the name of Lord Magmion 169 has made a pretty good speculation regarding this whole situation. So let me just go through what he has to say, just mixed in between with stuff that the captain kind of says within the game and whatnot. So the captain has a couple of visions throughout the game, which two of those pertains to the undead crisis. When taking the contract that require you to root out the undead from graveyard or ancient burial ground, you come across some ancient undead. When you do, these guys might refer to the captain as the False King and start attacking him. Respectively, witches also will refer to him as the False King, especially when you go to the witch hut, and the witch there refers to you as the False King. There are also some visions throughout the game that imply that you have this past life. For example, you can interact with the golden statue, this big statue, and when you interact with it, you are thrown into this vision where you are either the assailant or trying to defend someone against assailants. Probably the former, and you find this elder figure there, and you are fighting these golden clad big statue-like figures, and past them is this old elder person sitting there, or I guess standing, I'm not quite sure, but anyway, he's there, and you're trying to get to him, but in order to get to him, you got to beat these guys, and you snap out of it before you get to him. So possibly this old figure is the Conqueror being the boss enemy at the Black Monolith. And there are a lot of visions that will trigger upon eating like some not magical, but simply shrooms, basically. There's this wild man encounter where he'll give you some vegetation or whatever to eat, and then you have this hallucination of you being a owner of a castle. Now, I don't know if this is the ancient castle or if this is simply a castle like a medieval times castle. And so, for example, since he's a mercenary captain, maybe this is his dreams and ambitions coming to him in a wave, a hallucination or a fever dream while he's high, and he just imagined himself owning a castle because, what mercenary captain wouldn't want that after retirement? Or the drugs had enabled him to tap into his spiritual, existence, and he now remembers or is able to experience that past life that he had once again. The undead crisis begins, and the captain has this vision of him looking out from this balcony probably from a palace or something, and he's looking out towards the city, and in the city street is this army that is marching off to what is known as the Great Beyond. There is a woman who is, I guess, at a close relationship with him. At first, when I read this, I thought it was like the queen or something. Like, your wife, you're the emperor, she's your wife. But as you look into it, it kind of muddles that part. Like, you really don't know what your relationship with this woman is, but she is very important in the vision, because she also later appears in the vision after the crisis ends. So anyway, she says some things to you, and then all of a sudden Ragnarok happens or whatever. We don't really know. Everything's just wiped out. I kind of imagine it like Valyria being wiped out in Game of Thrones, or Pompeii, right? Because I mean, Valyria was kind of, it is referencing Pompeii, but I kind of imagine this like Pompeii kind of thing happening, like a volcano eruption or kind of like a big explosion, like this wipeout event that just takes out everyone in the whole city and everything with it. And right before that, the woman says some things to you, the emperor, right? Well, we'll get back to that. As I said before, the usurper probably, but it is you. It is you. She's talking to you and says that you're gonna be back, and then you wake up, and then the undead crisis has begun, and the ancient undead has been sprung out everywhere. After you survive the undead crisis, you don't really have any control of the dialogue. It gives you dialogue options, but the vision that you have after the crisis, basically, you're seeing the woman's spirit, I guess, appeased or something. You tell her like, hey, death isn't all that bad after all. And she's like, I guess so. And you're like, nah, man, like, I vouch for it. I'm sure that everything's going to be okay. And she's like, all right, dude. Cool. I trust you. And you're like, yeah, girl, you gotta go. You gotta go now. And she's like, all right. And then she ascends or descends. It depends on which way you think about it. Lord Magmion kind of speculates that this woman is probably a witch, because we do have witches in the game, and they do refer to the captain as the false king. So, putting two together, maybe this woman is a witch. Well, then, there's the question of what is she doing, right? Like, why is she telling us these things, like, you're gonna be back, and death isn't death isn't the end, or things like that. Really cryptic, but I guess the cryptic part also kind of plays into the idea that she's witch, kind of like Melisandre kind of witch vibes going on. The crisis is just the crisis itself, right? And it ends. It has a clear starting point and it has a clear ending point. You just gotta complete a bunch of contracts regarding the crisis. However, there is this one specific legendary location that we already mentioned before, which is the Black Monolith. Now, this place also has ancient undead. There's another place like the Sunken Library that also has undead, but the Black Monolith is like the OG legendary location, as I understand it. And the big bad is the Conqueror. So as we've mentioned before, Lord Magmion thinks that the Conqueror is the old man that we see in the assassination vision. So let's just say that the assassination attempt went well for the assailant. And let's just say that we are the assailant. We, as in the captain, is the assailant. His whole assassination attempt was backed up by the supernatural powers that this witch lady had granted him. Or maybe not directly granted him, but indirectly helped him take down this emperor, this original emperor. And maybe because of that, there was a curse set upon him that wiped out the entire empire and allowed him to come back, because the witch lady cursed him, as a last-ditch attempt to try and make things right. There's a possibility that the conqueror is, in a way, or the original emperor is in a way a very bad person, trying to resurrect not only undead, like that's just a byproduct of the real apocalyptic event that he was trying to unfold. We don't know what that is, but what if, right? This is what is speculated is, what if the undead crisis is just a byproduct of something even worse? And without the usurper or the false king's doings, supported by this witch lady, this world-ending event would have been triggered, and we wouldn't be dealing with just undead. We wouldn't even have a world to live in, right? Maybe some eldritch being would, consume the world or something like that. That is pretty much where Lord Magnion's speculation stands, right? The conqueror triggered the undead to be born, either as purposefully or as a product of his true intentions. And seeing this, the usurper, with the aid of the witch lady, successfully kills the conqueror and tries to put an end to whatever evil that he's trying to unleash on the world. And they succeed in taking down the emperor, but the disaster consumes the ancient empire anyway. So maybe they were too late. Maybe it was kind of like a death switch. Maybe killing the emperor was one of the requirements for triggering the whole thing, and they didn't know it. They were just played. Or maybe it was just, maybe the conqueror had enough time and they were just too late. So in any case, the ancient empire is destroyed, wiped out like that. And in the last ditch attempt at putting things right, making things right, because the witch lady, if she is a witch lady, maybe she's like an oracle, maybe she knows the future, maybe she doesn't even need to know the future, maybe she knows that the ancient dead will be rising again, and there will need to be a hero to come and save the day, and that hero would be the usurper. She then curses him right before they all die, to be reborn when the undead crisis is going to happen, to be able to stop it. And that is why we, the player, is in control of our mercenary company, playing as the captain, trying to stop the undead. So that kind of ties in the lore and the player motive pretty well. So I kind of like that. I really like this theory, and it really gave me what I really enjoy about this is that none of this is canon. It's all pretty much head canon for everyone, and I think it's good that every single person, every single player, or anyone who's interested in the Battle Brothers lore has their own head canon, and we all just put that in a big soup and we start stirring, and then everyone's got their own soup. And I don't know why I chose my example being soup, but the point is, I now have somewhere to jump off of. He gave me a platform. Now, my only thing to add is I always had this question within me as I was researching, is that when exactly did the undead, like the ancient undead, start being ancient undead? And to answer this question, it actually expanded on my idea of, if the ancient undead weren't always ancient undead, they were once human, then what makes them so hateful towards the usurper? What makes them so, aggressive and just antagonistic towards the player character, the captain, when he's come back, and they refer to him as the false king. Like, what's up with all that? I don't think the Conqueror is necessarily the original emperor. However, I feel like I don't know enough to actually come up with a theory in that part, so we'll just say that the Conqueror is the antagonist of the time as well, and that's who the usurper killed and took his place. Those who were loyal to the Conqueror or the original emperor, they would hate the usurper and subsequently the captain, rightfully so, because they were loyal to the guy who was killed by the usurper. Honor Guard is exactly that. They were completely encased in gold, and they were supposed to look like these inhuman statues protecting the emperor. They were the hand and the will of the emperor. They had no emotions. They had no personal gains. They had no ambitions. They were just there to serve, and it was the highest honor that anyone could have. But basically, they didn't have a life. Their life was being the honor guard, and that's who you're fighting in the dream. So if that's who you're fighting, then I assume the elderly figure behind those two, that the statues, well, statue-like guards are protecting, is in fact the emperor. Is that the Conqueror? I don't know. I mean, it is an elder figure, so the Conqueror is like this, again, like this real Chad dude who can just, one-shot your bros. He doesn't look like an elder dude. So again, I kind of feel like the Conqueror and the Emperor are two different things. But putting that aside, in any case, I started thinking about whether the undead, they weren't originally undead. So if they weren't originally undead, then there must have been a time when they were loyal to one side or the other as living humans. And what's interesting is that they all refer to him as the false king. What if they, not only them, but what if even the common people referred to him as the false king? Because everyone would know that the usurper usurped the throne. And because he usurped the throne, I mean, they can't go against it. Maybe because he does control an army, as we see in the initial vision where he's looking out from the balcony towards the army that's marching off into the great beyond. That's his army. People can't openly be against him, but they probably talked behind his back, right? Like, everyone just referred to him as the false king. There might be why the ancient undead refer to him as the false king. That might be why the witches at the witch's hut refer to him as the false king. Another interesting point that Lord Magmion pointed out was that the witches at the witch's hut say that they want, or she wants, the same thing the false king wants. We don't know what that is. We don't know what it is that she wants that he wants, but she does say that she wants what he wants. So maybe there are some witches that are in league with the usurper, or whatever that he's meant to be. And then there are other witches who are totally against that and want his power for themselves. So there's a very clear, battle going on there. What if the Conqueror going to the monolith, the black monolith, was trying to excavate this thing and bring apocalypse onto the world, and that's what the usurper and the witch lady were trying to stop? And what if the great beyond that is mentioned in the initial vision before for the undead crisis, what if that great beyond is the black monolith? Like I said, usually, like even in real history, like things that are referred in that term are usually just places that haven't been discovered yet. So it's not nothing supernatural or unworldly. It's things that people just didn't know at the time, because it was too far away or too dangerous to get to. The black monolith is usually outside of the known world. We, as players in game, need to go find it, but we know that it's already been found because there's a clear excavation site. You know, it is an excavation site. It's referred to as a quarry. And when you go there, you see a bunch of workers, and then come out the legionnaires, and you got to fight the undead, and you got to fight the conqueror. So that was already discovered, but before it is in the parts of the world, the fringes of the world, and it's hard to get to. So it's therefore could possibly be referred to as the Great Beyond. Why were the army? If that's the case, then there has to be a reason why an army was being sent to this location. I'm suspecting that after the usurper killed the conqueror, or the emperor for that matter, there were loyalists to the empire who fought for the usurper because they weren't necessarily loyal to the usurper, they were just loyal to the empire. And since the usurper is on top of the leader of the empire, you know, that's who they're going to support. And then you have separatists who are still loyal to the original emperor, not the empire itself, but the original emperor, and who try and complete whatever the emperor was trying to do with the black monolith. So after the emperor was killed, they took whatever army they had and they headed to the black monolith to fulfill whatever that was trying to be done. Getting wind of this, the usurper mustered an army and had them march towards the Great Beyond, but too little too late, apocalypse already came and the whole empire was wiped out. If the conqueror is in fact the emperor, maybe they needed his dead body. Maybe they were trying to resurrect him at the black monolith. Maybe the black monolith is something that has that kind of power to imbue a life into a corpse. But that corpse won't be itself anymore. It's not the original man, it's a twisted version of it. And that's why the ancient undead maybe remember their lives as a human, but they no longer have the feelings, the emotions, the soul that they used to hold when they were a human. And that's why, even if at a time they were these honorable soldiers for the empire, they now simply are on this bloodlust for everything that's living. We know this because one of the ancient undead, one of the variants of it, is the ancient priest. The ancient priest is a priest for the old gods, and they were supposed to pray for fertility and prosper, and all that kind of stuff. You know, nice things. But now, as an undead priest, they create a miasma, this poisonous gas that kills people. And they don't inspire hope, but they instill fear and terror into them. And they horrify the opponent, the enemy, or people in general. So they're a complete opposite of what they used to be. So that kind of tells me that maybe these ancient undead, remember they have a resemblance of what they used to be. They can do what they used to do, but not fully. It's not what they were. They're not themselves anymore. They have some emotions. They have some sort of sentience left in them, but it's not who they were. They no longer stand for what they stood for. But they do remember one thing, that they hate the usurper. That they want to kill the usurper, and that's what they did. That's what they did, and that's what they did to bring the apocalypse onto their own homes, really. And that's how much they hated this guy. And that's why even to this day they remember him and they call him the false king and they go after him. Even if it's a reincarnated version of him, they still want to kill him. Because that's how much they hate him. Now here's another thing that was interesting regarding the ancient undead. The ancient undead are actually a mix of different legionnaires from different times. Basically, the ancient empire spanned, across a large swath of land for many generations. So some ancient legions, the undead, may come from the early parts of the empire, and other ones who are fighting alongside those might come from a latter time. And yet now they're all just ancient undead, and they're all, fighting for one cause, to kill the false king. Why do they all refer to the captain as the false king? Because it's understandable that the very last legionaries that existed up until the very moment of the collapse of the empire remember him as the false king. That's understandable because they would have been living at that time. But what about the legionnaires who lived hundreds of years ago? They wouldn't have had anything to do with these guys or the usurper or the false king. They wouldn't have known that unless the false king is some kind of religious prophecy. That would make sense, because if it is, and if that kind of prophecy existed at the inception of the empire, then people of that time would know what the false king meant, and therefore be able to hate the false king as much as the legionnaires who died when the empire collapsed. Also, I really wanted it to be mentioned in this entry because the devs have made it clear, devs for this game at Overhype made it clear that the ancient empire may have collapsed due to some kind of religious schism. This will probably come up later in later entries, but they didn't clearly say that it did, but they were heavily implying it. So I want to respect that. I want to really touch on that and say, hey, the devs are saying this might be the case. Wink, wink. So if that is, then there has to be some kind of religious aspect to the fall of the empire. And having the false king, some kind of religious prophecy, checks that, as well as the fact that the legionnaires are, and this is also what the devs intended, and they've clearly stated that the legionnaires are coming from different eras of the empire. It makes sense, because if it was some kind of religious prophecy and they all hated the false king because the false king is what would bring the collapse of the empire or would bring the end of the world or something like that, then they would rightfully hate them because they are part of the empire. Now, when the devs mentioned the religious schism and all that, they weren't really talking about the false king. They were actually talking about the fact that the empire was comprised of many different cultures from many different peoples over a vast land, and so that includes the southern parts to the northern tribes and all of that. So each people had their own religion, their own customs, their own culture, traditions, all of that. That was all compressed into this one state. So this one state, as it was one empire, as much as it wanted to call itself one big thing, they were all the same. They were all working towards the same thing. In reality, it probably wasn't. There were many different factions within the empire that were working towards their own goals, whether that was personal gain or more coming from a religious zealotry to, I guess, reform the empire or whatever region that they controlled to that worship. And those things would clash and collide each other until the empire basically imploded. It collapsed on its own because of the very people inside of it started to fight each other. I feel like in a world such as Battle Brothers, to pursue something that is more realistic, as interesting as that it may be, because sometimes limitation is key to inspire creativity and brilliance. It's not really what I would want, is I guess what I'm trying to say. I really, because I mean, this is a world with orcs and goblins and ghosts and vampires and walking trees, you know, dream-eating demons. Like, you know, it's a fantasy world. So I would like to assume that the empire collapsed due to fantastical reasons. In any case, as the game is supposed to be a role-playing sandbox game, the false king aspect of it, the false king background of the captain, allows the player to be able to tap into that richness. Also, I guess I already talked about Ancient Empire Collapse while I was talking about False King, so I guess that's that. That was the first tier of the Battle Brothers Iceberg. I hope you guys enjoyed. I personally really enjoyed researching all this and making speculations about it. I would love to hear back from anyone who has their own ideas about what they think regarding the lore, or maybe even like the technical parts of it, because there were a lot of those. A lot of the entries were about the actual gameplay. So I would love to hear from people. Leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next episode.